And I'm here today to talk about something that we began a couple of years ago. Well, I'll get into it, but it's our Google Club. So I know there was at least one person from our Google Club here earlier, but she had to leave. She had some sort of emergency. But anyway, so this is the Literacy Assistance Center. We're a small organization, but mighty. And again, we have, you might recognize some faces or some names, but we have folks who specialize in math and science, ESL. We also manage the data system for the state of New York for NRS and WIOA. We have historically done in-person workshops, and now I think since pandemic we've kind of remained mostly remote, and part of that is that New York City is strangely difficult to move around in, and so we found that teachers actually can learn a lot virtually and are able to jump on a workshop more easily than if they have to travel from the Bronx down to where we are, which is in Lower Manhattan. So we've become very very virtual, I would say. And that was partly what led us to jump into our Google Club. Again, I keep getting ahead of myself. So anyway, we had been noticing when I was doing my technology workshops, I would often start them off by asking people who were attending or participating what, their name, the program that they worked for, but what did they hope to learn today? Like what was the, this is a workshop on making your own Google website. What did you want to learn today? And the answers were often these very, like everything, like I just want to know everything. And I understand that, but it was problematic in that I felt like it meant that there wasn't really, people weren't coming with clear questions, and there wasn't maybe a space in their brain to kind of plonk the stuff that was coming in. And that was challenging. And a lot of our workshops were one-off. So you might come to many workshops at the Literacy Assistance Center, but they'd all be on different topics, and there was no requirement to kind of do them in any kind of process or any order. We also felt that teachers often seemed to talk about their professional development as something that was required by their program or by a funder, and not necessarily really feeling ownership of it. The last strategy session, they talked about the title and deed. I felt like teachers weren't really feeling like they had title and deed to the training that they were receiving, and that they didn't own, they didn't have a place to list all the skills they'd learned, and we wanted to help with that. And then because we are doing a lot of these one-off workshops, it was hard to, I don't know, observe maybe or support kind of that scaffolding of moving up in a skill set, right? So you would learn a lot because you came to 10 different Google workshops, but they were very different skills, and we weren't really able to track for you, or you weren't able to necessarily track your skills. So we wanted to think about a way to have sustained professional development, but yet not make it cumbersome or problematic for teachers who don't, they're mostly part-time workers. They can't consistently come to a multi-session series if it's, very demanding. So those were the things that we had recognized. And this was, we'd been kind of observing this before the pandemic, but when the pandemic hit and we moved into the remote world, we still saw the same issue, and it gave us we had some new tools we could use. So we thought, what if we could do something on a monthly basis? If it could be offered virtually, so it would be less cumbersome for people to kind of, again, travel from spot to spot. We also thought maybe our workshops were often 2 to 3 hours. Maybe this was shorter, like an hour or hour and a half. And that was even less likely for people to want to travel long distances to get to. And that we would include some sort of reflection, maybe a personal learning plan in the process. And certainly have an opportunity for the people participating to really share what they were learning, rather than having sort of a sage on the stage situation. And that led us to Google Club. So Adult Ed Google Club meets once a month. We it's like the third, I think it's the third or fourth Wednesday now. And we started off in our first year, January of 2021, we met for 1 hour. And we generally had 15 to 25 participants, which was a pretty large number for a virtual kind of work kind of meeting. We were doing it from 4 to 5:30, which just turned out, or 4 to 5, I guess, originally. And it turned out that that was it worked for people. I think, again, it kind of falls between that daytime teaching and evening teaching. We definitely have some people who can't make it. And we do record our sessions so that folks who can't come can still benefit from what goes on in a meeting. So year one, we just started. We did an inventory. I think we did a survey to find out what people were interested in, and we did use that to kind of schedule out meetings with a specific focus. So each meeting had a specific focus within the Google world. And we concentrated on Google because we felt that Google was such a rich tool for a lot of our programs. So the adult ed field in New York City particularly, and true for the state as well, is that it's multiple different kinds of organizations that are participating. So you have community-based organizations, you have libraries, you have community colleges, and you have the Department of Education. And they really vary in access to computer labs, what they can really bring into the classroom. And again, as we know from the pandemic so clearly, but even before that, most of our students were not accessing computers very frequently outside of whatever was available in their program. So they might be using their phones, or they might go to the library, they might go to a friend's house to use a computer. And what we liked about Google was that it moved with them, right? So they don't have to pay for software. They just create a Google account and then they have access, and it would work across all their devices. And that felt like a very rich tool to give our students. Teachers similarly, actually, I think what we really learned during the pandemic also was that our teachers also do not have access, often didn't have laptops even at home. That became a big struggle when we first moved on to doing remote teaching. So again, being able to start something at home and then continue it at work or vice versa. So that's why we picked Google. And we also felt like it was a very rich, it was a manageable area, but it was also rich with possibilities. And when we talk about topics, the topics, I didn't put it in the slides, but the topics really are how you use a specific tool or a couple of tools for an applied process, right? So it wasn't just like Google Sheets. It was Google Sheets for administration, or it would be, we just did a Google Drive session that was really about organizing your Google Drive and being more efficient. And so there's always this applied element to it. So we had our first 6 months, our fiscal year is July to June. So this was kind of the second half of that year. And so then we were really set up to start off our year two. So year two, we did a full year, July to June. We added an extra half hour. We still run out of time, but we're now 90 minutes. And it kind of models on this, where the idea was to have some presentation or sharing, and then an opportunity at the end to have discussion. And it hasn't really worked very well. I think there's a lot of discussion throughout, and we're really trying to, I think the people who've been coming frequently feel very comfortable now and less shy and are willing to say more and to share how they've been using things, but that's still one of our big struggles. We have 204 members. In year two, we had 204 members on our Google group who we would promote our sessions to. We had done a couple of workshops nationally. I presented on this at COABE and some other places. So we actually have people from all over the world on our mailing list. We usually have about 40 people who would register. And again, year two, we started doing more with registration and tracking things. So we had approximately 27 people coming, which for us was a pretty good number of folks to join. We share the slides and any other materials that come from the session. And then we also record the meetings and put those up on YouTube, so they're available to anybody. And we also started a blog, and that was kind of something that happened about halfway through that year, but we've backed up all our content. So I think it's all there now. So if you go to the blog and that QR code there, if you scan that, you'll get to our blog, and we'll also put the link in the chat. But the blog has the video, it has the link to the slides, and so it's a place you can go and find the topics that we've covered. And again, kind of modeling using Blogger, because we're using Blogger for our blog, which is a Google product. And I think part of our consciousness here was also to model what we thought teachers could do in their classrooms, and tools that they could that students could use to practice their digital skills and help in their regular lives, right? Like these are ways that we use these tools in regular life. Thank you very much, Ebony, for sharing that link to the blog. So year 2, we really wanted to push this idea of the personal learning plan, and I'll tell you, it was hard. People, you know, they were willing to come to these meetings and participate and tell us the amazing things that they were doing with the tools, but it was hard to get folks to really want to pin down their personal learning plan. So we have a couple of different versions here, and you'll have these slides. I think we shared the slides, or certainly I can share some of these links. But so we made a Google Doc version of a personal learning plan. We have a slides version of the personal learning plan, again, thinking that teachers might turn around and use this with their students. We also used, so back when Google Workspace was G Suite and they had a certificate for that, we created sort of a checklist of all the skills you needed for that certificate. And we still use that kind of as a self-assessment. So you can go through there and, you know, have you even heard of this thing, or do you feel really comfortable doing this thing? And then you could kind of identify the areas that you really wanted to work on, which was part of creating the personal learning plan, was understanding what was it that you wanted to know more. And this was, again, trying to practice that self-awareness and reflection of, like, what is it that I want to learn? What is my question? What is the thing that I'm missing that I want to get? And we did use the North Star assessment for Google Docs, which you should try it out. I did it and I got my points, but it was tricky. So it was a great eye opener for folks to try out some assessments like that. One of the struggles we had at the end of year 2 was realizing that we didn't have a lot of data. Like, I wanted to share the story and the joy of Google Club, but we hadn't designed it with a lot of places for us to grab numbers or talk about how, you know, how this has impacted teachers actually in their lives or in their work. And so we went into year 3. We had a little bit of a break because we had some funding delays, but we're just now starting year 3. And year 3, we're trying to be a little bit more aware of bringing in ways to gather data. We've always done a lot of, you know, we have like comments from people who in the evaluations and things like that, but we don't have like this clear sense or beautiful numbers that we can just share that say, you know, 90% of our teachers say that they learned 5 skills. I don't know what we're doing. That's partly our problem, right? We're not trained really very well to create those data gathering points. So that's what we're trying to work on for year 3. So we do have some things that folks have said to us. And I do think, again, you know, it was one of the big things that happened during the pandemic was that people were coming to a workshop on digital skills or on technology, and they were literally using that the next day. Like, before pandemic, yeah, it was interesting, you know, maybe one day I'll do something with YouTube. But now people were desperate and hungry, and we're going to have an opportunity the very next day or even later that day to utilize what we were doing. So I think that was sort of part of the perfect storm of what Google Club responded to, is that, you know, people were really hungry for this and they were going to use it the next day. So I use what you all teach me every day. It is casual. I mean, I think the idea of club was that we're kind of all in there. We're members of a club. This is not a workshop per se, although sometimes it feels a bit more like that than I would like. But again, this idea that confidence of asking questions, and I think that going back to why maybe teachers were not saying what they wanted to get from the session was not a lack of confidence, but some shyness, like not really wanting to demand things from the session or even have thought in advance to kind of be clear in what they expected to get. And then that last comment there, exploring and experimenting, and I think that's a big piece of the energy of Google Club, is that it's very open, and it is about experimenting, and the kind of underpinning is curiosity and let's try it out, and modeling how you, I mean, digital resilience, right? Modeling how you handle it when the thing doesn't do what you expected, or I don't know, I don't have the answer. Does someone want to Google that? Like, so being very clear in modeling how you live with technology, right? That it's not this strict, harsh thing, and that some people know and some people don't know. All right, we already said that. The other thing is that people have said also that they'd like us to end on time. That's still a struggle for us. They want more time, but it's a struggle because, would people really be able to do 2 hours? We don't know. The hands-on activity piece is interesting because it again is this idea that we're somehow designing a workshop and we feel like, no, you're supposed to come and tell us what you did. So it's an interesting piece here to kind of understand how the participants, how the members of the club perceive their role, right? Lesson ideas, I think that's something that we're conscious of, that we want to include more of a reflection within the meetings about, well, the things we did today, can you imagine how that could turn into a lesson? But some of it isn't about lessons, some of it's about just life. And then more opportunities for members to share. So we did hear that. Again, I think trying to make more space for that. And definitely having at least one truly just show and tell. So last year we ended the year with a show and tell where it was really all the people sharing were the people that have been members of the club. I will have to say, I had to reach out to people individually and be like, hey, you mentioned that thing, and how would you like to do a little session on it? Like, people are so shy. It's still our biggest struggle, is this shyness, or taking that, leap. So you're there. We're just all here together in this group, sharing what we know. So we're up to 218 people on our mailing list. Our data gathering, so we're doing more self-assessments. We're asking folks at the beginning of a session and then trying to have an opportunity at the end to reflect on what did you gain today. And we're putting into action this time a digital badge project. So we will only have, I think, 6 meetings this fiscal year. So we started February, and I think there are 2 in June. And for each session, there are a set of skills with a specific tool, and there's a project that you can choose to take on if you want to, that will lead to some I guess, technology, digital evidence of your skills. And if you take that on, and we'll have a clear rubric, you will get a badge that clearly delineates that set of skills, that you have proven that you have that set of skills. The idea of the digital badge, I know they're still tricky, and now I don't even know, we're still looking for who we'll make them with, but the idea is that then teachers own their professional development. They can demonstrate their skills, they can put it on their LinkedIn profile, they can put it in their resume, that maybe they create their own websites, but that they really have this evidence, this thing that they've created, and it's making us a little bit more clear also, I think, in what we're covering in the meeting. So the kind of consciousness of that. Let's see, I'm going to check the chat. So Rebecca asks, how much time do you find it takes someone to achieve proficiency who has not already used Google Docs? Again, because people are a little bit shy, we find, and because people drop in and out of Google Club, there's like literally our first session this year was the basics of Google Drive, like how do you change the color of a folder, which isn't necessarily a base skill that everyone would have, but it's always surprising to me how many people aren't thinking that way when they look at their drive. With docs, we did a sort of a scavenger hunt where people had to go into a doc and do all these activities within the doc and kind of discover there was a dictionary there, and that you could actually kind of insert an image from the internet right into your doc and all that stuff. And I think by the end of it, they're able to do that. I think there are people who come in who've never done it, and there are some people who come in who use docs all the time, but these were still kind of little tips and tricks. So we kind of try to balance it there. Proficiency is tricky. And this idea of these self-assessments, I'm going to be interested this year to see how that impacts the way people think about the discrete skills that we're talking about. So because we're doing this in an applied way, we haven't really pulled apart what are all the skills you're learning to do this applied thing, right? That you are making a escape room in Google Slides. You have an escape room, and that's a fun game, but we haven't taken time, I think, to delineate, like, well, you did all these things. You had to know how to do all of this stuff to make that. And that's what we're doing this year with both the digital badge and the self-assessment piece, where before we start a meeting, people will kind of be aware of they'll go through either a poll or a Google form that just basically asks them, are you familiar with these things, or where's your familiarity level? I think we do you can actually look, we can put that link in the chat. I'll do that in a minute. But so you can see what the self-assessment looked like for Google Drive. But yeah, this is a huge issue. And I think for adult ed in general, this is an issue where professional development is kind of a hit, there's not, at least in our state, there's not, there's some very specific things that people need to get training in, but the rest is kind of left up to the person, and assessing how far people have come along in a set of skills is actually one of our challenges, I think. So the portfolio, so in addition to the badges, the idea is that there's also going to be a portfolio. So the badges, we're trying to help people, so we're giving them a deadline. They have to complete each task the Monday before the next Google Club, because I work to a deadline, so give me a deadline and I'll get that done. Now, if you come in the middle of the year and you've not seen all these things, or you didn't have time to do the digital badge on that timeline, you have the ability to do the portfolio project, which is that you take 3 of the possible badge projects and you put them in a folder and share them with us. And then that is a different way of showing us the work that you did, and it's not on that tight timeline. Okay. I wanted to mention, so the LEC also does a lot of, we do quite a lot of reports. And so we have a report that just came out called Strengthening Adult Literacy Education, Updated Results from an NYC Pilot Project. So this was a project that was funded by our city council to add additional funding to city funding for adult education, with the idea that the funding would be used to not to create additional seats, which is usually what happens, but to add more wraparound services or more supports within programs, and to gather data on that and see that what the outcomes of that were. So this report is year 2 of this pilot, and what's really kind of the reason I'm bringing it in today is partially because yes. So yes, this much money for this many programs. So yeah, 19 adult literacy programs run by community-based organizations. And they could all make up what they wanted to do with this money within a sort of set of possibilities. So it's had an impact on over almost 6,000 students. And these are all the things that it's helped with, and you can see digital literacy skills was a big one here, and actually it's been a really big one in what the outcomes are showing. And this is really important because we're still very far behind as far as what funders are paying for, so that our adult education programs are not being funded to provide digital skills right now. And so in order to do it, that there's no outcomes, our state doesn't track outcomes to do with digital skills, our city government doesn't track digital literacy skill outcomes. So programs have to make a decision to include digital literacy because either other funding that they've found or because they've just recognized that it's really important, and it's meant that they've had to bring it into their regular instruction, but in addition to whatever was already required. So this funding has been really supported, and also that programs chose digital literacy as one of the skills or one of the areas that they really wanted to use this funding for. So that's very exciting. All the 19 programs have had staff at our meetings. But Google Club is not, 100% related to this, but certainly the movement and the understanding that digital skills are important and something that need to be supported, this funding has really helped with.